General Sullivan and AUSA, is always great to come out. And yes, this is home for me. I'm a Alabama boy, born and raised in the local area from Scottsboro, and my family still lives here. I have a son and grandchildren that live here in Huntsville over in Hampton Cove. So it's always good to come back to the state of Alabama and get back home again. Roll Tide. I'm sure there's probably some more Eagle folks out here, but that's all right. We won't ask you to leave the room. Well, that's okay, sir. That's all right. I mean, they're both Alabama teams. You know, there are those of us that root for both of them at certain times, so that's quite all right. It's kind of interesting. I spoke at the aviation symposium back in January, and there were a couple of tough issues we had then that came up, and they were raised a day or two before, and then we were kind of embargoed about what we could say, and I had to kind of embargo my comments. And it was interesting that last night I get an email, and I was going to talk a little bit about the for March budget going in and stuff, and I get a direct email last night that was told to be careful on the comments that I was going to make today and not get ahead of the president's budget that's going in on the 4th of March. So I'll try to keep my comments to where I don't get in trouble as I try to give you some kind of idea of how we're going to try to resource this Army in a physically constrained environment. And I will tell you that it is going to continue to remain that way for the next several years. And General Sullivan, in his comment, he said it as an aside, talking about mass and manpower. I will tell you that we realize that. The Army realizes that. The senior leaders realize that. And the key is ensuring that our nation understands of what our Army brings to the fight. I mean, technology is a very important aspect of it, but we are a manpower-intensive force. I mean, that's if you look at the percentages of what we spend our money on, it is around people, and people are our core, and that's something that we can't forget in the future. And we have to understand that we'll have to continue to do that. But part of the challenge in this environment is being able to balance that in strength and understanding that we are about numbers and the readiness of those numbers, and then the modernization, the technology that we give them so they can meet the mission challenges that they're going to be given in the future, regardless of what type of battlefield it is, whether it's in a coin environment or whether it's in a large movement with, you know, mass formations. I mean, you still have to achieve that balance, and that's part of the challenge over the next several years that we as an Army are going to have to get to. And behind that, of course, as you all know, the shrinking budgets make this very difficult. And not only because they're shrinking, but also because of the sequestration in the Budget Control Act, that makes it even more challenging for the Army as we try to get after a manpower-intensive force and understanding that and then giving them the technology and the training they need to do that. A lot of folks looked at the BBA, or the Bipartisan Budget Act, that was enacted by Congress, and they think that solved the problems. But in reality, that was a 2-year fix. And for the Army's perspective, it was really only a 1-year fix. It helped us in FY14. In other words, it gave us some $14 to put towards modernization and readiness, not necessarily the manpower side, because we're already on a path coming down from a 570 force going to a 490 force in 15, with some indications, if you read in the press, they talk about the Army going possibly down to a 420 force. The Chief and the Secretary have been very adamant, stating that really 450 is about as low as we can go. That's the force and that we will need to meet the Defense Strategic Guidance and to be able to meet the mission sets that we think we're going to be asked to do as an Army. So as we look at the Bipartisan Budget Act, there was not a lot of relief there. 15 was even smaller. If you look at the amount that the DOD got from across that Bipartisan Budget Act, the $9 billion, not roughly $9 billion more. The Army share of that was very small. So as we're looking out into the future, you know, 14, we get a budget, but again, we're well into the year before we get the money, so we'll wrestle with that as we're laying it against our requirements this year. 15, we don't see any gain. In actuality, there's probably a leveling out or probably a decrease in 15 following that going into 16 and into 17. So that's the challenges we have in the future as we look out 5 years ahead and trying to lay out programs and get at that. Now, the other aspect of it is, as you're wrestling with the manpower and the force structure, and you're coming down from a 574 down to a 490 and lower than a 490, possibly down as low as a 450. If you look at the Budget Control Act numbers, it had us going to as low as possibly a 420. The other aspect of that is, now how do you shape the force with its equipment and modernization? And how do you restructure and take that excess equipment you have and develop your programs that you can put into them either the new technology against determining which aspects of your programs, whether it's in ground combat vehicles, whether it's in the aviation arena, and I know you've all heard that's one of the topics on the Aviation Restructure Initiative that we're working, but it's across the entire fleet of equipment that we have of being able to ensure what is the right amount based on the force structure we have, that then we can keep modernized and either do engineering change proposals or work new programs that are going to come into the Army in the future. So as we do this, we know that we're going to continue to have fiscal uncertainties. The manpower side of it, as I've said, we're looking to come down to 490 and 15. We've got the Army on a ramp to do about 15 to 20,000 a year coming down. The Chief and Secretary have been very vocal about the fact that anything before 450, as I said, accepts strategic risk. And we've got to be able to, and we are trying to defend that every day to keep that level of force we have. The concern on readiness is returning to a tiered readiness. That also will create an operational risk for us. You know, as you bring the force down, you change your modernization programs, you have to look at how we're going to keep that force ready. And we don't want to get back to a tiered readiness. We're getting away from an ALO. If you look at where we stand now in all components, both AC, National Guard, and Reserve, our equipment on hand is the best that it's been ever in the Army. The modernization rate is the best that it's ever been in the Army. All three components, if you look at equipment on hand, are in the low 90%, which is something that, and I see General Stevenson out here, I mean, that's something that we worked very hard for over the last 8 or 9 years to ensure that all three components were taken care of. So if you've got the equipment and you figure out what your manpower numbers are, then the next important part is then how do you do that readiness aspect of it, and how you not allow us to get to a tiered approach of where we have the haves and have-nots, and that's one of the next big challenges. On the modernization side, as we look at 14 to 19, and I've said this several times, and the Chief, General Odierno, has mentioned this many times. Of course, our modernization, as we're drawing down from a 570, we can't get there fast enough. We're still trying to maintain readiness, so where do you have to go to cover your bills? That's in your modernization programs. And that's been a significant challenge, especially in the 14, 15, 16 time frame of moving those dollars out of our programs, modernization programs, to cover the ramp for bringing down the people. So we're looking very close at how we do that. We're focusing on incremental improvements. We're going to invest in some target S&T, and I see Mary Miller over here. We make sure that we're focusing our S&T programs where we are more of the, separating between the technology makers, which we do, versus technology takers, and letting industry put some of their dollars in that. I will tell you, and I know Mary will smile about this, when we submitted, as we're working on budgets, the Army was really the only service that protected our S&T programs. We took the lowest amount of dollars out of our S&T. That's very critical to us. I mean, that's really, we see that as the cornerstone and backbone of where we're going to get at in the future. So if we don't put dollars into their S&T programs, we will not have new ideas or new innovation of things we can do differently when we get to a period in the, say, 18 and 19 time frame that we've now got some technology that we can start putting against and getting it out into the force in any kind of number. So that's a good thing. I think that our senior leaders, both the Chief and Secretary, were very adamant about doing that. And the focus then, of course, as you do that, you're now shifting into the late 20s, early 30s in all your different programs based on some of this technology that's coming out, and you'll start to see that. So as I've said, it is challenging times for us in our Army. But again, this is, and General Sullivan mentions this many times, as you look back, this is only one of those periods of time that continues to come back around again. For those of us that have been doing this for 35, 40, 45 years, as I look at some of the faces out here, it repeats itself, and we do have to make sure we don't forget the lessons we learned of what happened to us in the 90s, what happened to us in the 70s, and I will tell you that we've taken the task to try to remember some of those lessons and learn from them so we don't make the same mistakes in the future. The hard part, again, is balancing that in strength, modernization, and readiness. And on the modernization side, we know we're going to have an Army that's going to be smaller. Whether it's a 450 or 420 Army, it's smaller than we've ever had. But it's going to have to be a ready Army and a modern Army to meet the mission task. And so to modernize and equip the total Army, we've got to ensure that, one, the equipment is affordable, it's got to be sustainable, and it's got to be cost effective. And that's kind of, as we're shaping this, looking at the dollars we have over the next 5-year program, we're kind of taking a hard look at everything we do to do that. And that's going to require some creative thinking. I mean, we like to say that the Army is flexible and adaptive, and I will tell you that we've got a lot of smart kids out there that have some great ideas, and it is going to require some creative thinking and some new approaches to how we're doing business. And that's why one of them was, of course, the aviation restructure, which is a kind of a new approach of how you're doing that. But I will tell you that that's going to be important as we move into the future to ensure that whatever size force it is, whether it's a 420, 450, somewhere in between there, or a 460, 470, that at least we have a modernization program that we can outfit those great Americans that have taken the challenge to protect our nation, to give them the equipment they need, and to keep them ready and trained. So with that, I like to tell you that there are a lot of folks that think that it's a glass half empty. I will tell you that the times are not going to be easy, but it's also, from my perspective, there's a lot of change here. We're going to make, we can make some good decisions. We can make some decisions that we probably backed away from for many years. Now it's an environment that will allow us to make some of these decisions, and I think it's a glass half full. We've got a lot of room here to make some good decisions about where we're going to take the force, how we're going to train the force, how we're going to equip the force, and at the end of the day, what that force will be able to do and the capabilities that they will bring our nation. And so from that perspective, Barclay likes to think of it as there's a lot of opportunities here for our senior leaders to make some bold decisions and drive our Army to a place that we know we have to have it. So with that, I'll close, and if there's anybody with any questions, we have one. Anyone else? I mean, okay, clearly the Guard and Reserve are critical to a smaller Army more than ever. How can we reassure RC leaders, better governors in Congress, that the Chief and Secretary of the Army understand this well? Again, I think the key is, and I mentioned this about the numbers, I mean, we're committed. I think the Guard and Reserve can see the fact that they look at the numbers, you look at your equipment on hand, you look at your modernization rate. I mean, we have been committed over the last 10 years to try to bring all three compos closer together so they look the same as those type units that do, is when you come to the modernization side. The other aspect of it is also on the training side. I mean, we're still committed. We do the CTC rotations. We're getting the Guard into that integral back into those CTC training rotations that we kind of got out of even with our active forces over the last 10 or 12 years that we've been at war. So it is it's a critical aspect of that is to ensure that not only are the governors but also the Hill and legislature understand where we stand with the equipment and modernization aspect of it. And as I said, that is a positive story that how we've improved both the reserve component and the National Guard over the last 10 years, and it's something that we're going to try to echo more in the future to make sure that everyone understands that. Okay. Ooh. Just making sure you're paying attention. Given the readiness and physical challenges, why is the Army not putting more dollars into the live virtual constructive training systems support to help with the Army integrated training environment? Without divulging where we're going with the budget that we're about to submit, on the 4th of March, the Secretary of Defense is going to come out next week and kind of give a rollout for that. But I will tell you that the Army is, we understand the TSS aspect of it and live virtual constructive, and it's much like the S&T programs. We know that we've got to commit dollars and put dollars into that arena to ensure that we can train the force to the mission sets that we know we're going to get at. And I think we've done a good job without giving numbers and quoting, but I think the senior leaders realize the importance of live virtual constructive and the simulation piece and the TSS aspect of the installations, and where we're going to have to put some dollars to ensure that we don't fall off of that. Again, that's again one of the cornerstones and basis of how we train and how we're going to train in the future. So, you know, if you did a comparison of dollars that we have put in the past into that area and where we're going to go in the future, I think you'll see as we start uncovering some of and the budgets get released, you'll see that we are not backing away from that, but we are putting an emphasis on it. Next question is, can you share comments on another potential round for BRAC and the timeline for this potential round? What is the Army's analytical framework for BRAC round decisions? You know, I think there is no appetite if you go over on the Hill for another BRAC round. There is also always discussion about the 2005 BRAC, what came out of that versus the mid-90s BRAC. Sometimes it's lost on a lot of folks, and it's not only on those political leaders that are elected, but the BRAC in the 90s was a completely different BRAC from the 2005 BRAC. The BRAC in the 90s was a reduction BRAC, whereas the BRAC in 2005, we were a Grow the Army BRAC, and there weren't a lot of savings coming out of that, and sometimes there's some false comparisons to that. But we know that if we bring the Army down to a 450 force, there is going to be excess equipment. There's going to be excess installation space that we're going to have to look at. There's going to be some consolidations. That'll be determined based on how many BCTs we end up with, what that final number will be. And from an Army's perspective, we know if we go to a 420 force, which is the sequestration force, there is no doubt that there will be excess property, not only equipment, but also from the installation side that will require a BRAC. Now, whether there is the political will to go through another BRAC process, I mean, that will be the Army's job to lay out. And on the analytical side, we're already doing those comparisons. We're balancing the number of BCTs against the installation cost, against what it costs to what we would call keep warm an installation versus completely shut down an installation. So we're slowly gathering that data, and it will kind of be dependent upon what the final outcome is of what the Army goes down to. Again, that would drive us to what I would like to call a full-blown BRAC, which would where you would look at possibly consolidating and then eliminating some of those different installations. But at a 450 force, which we're working hard to try to keep, it's not as bad as it would be for a 420 force. Any other? You tell me. I mean, as the force reduces, the individual becomes more important. Are there plans to increase the independence of soldiers from day one of basic training? You know, I think if you look at where we are now with training our basic soldiers and going into basic training, you know, the young men and women that we get off the street today are much different than when I came off the street into the Army. The Army is much different today. So I will tell you that as we move forward, and although I'm the resourcer and the program guy, I'm not the G3, the training guy, but I will tell you that the Army has a lot of things that we're looking, the G3 is tied into, and it's much more than just those basic skill sets that we train soldiers every day to do, besides just the marksmanship. It's really more about those interdependencies, even though this talks about the independence, it's more about interdependencies of what these young kids and what's required to ensure that they can meet the requirements that we're asking them to do. And a lot of that is the Ready Resilient campaign. As we move forward and we talk about all these things to take care of, and it's not only the new ones we're bringing in, but it's also those young men and women that we have brought in over the last 5, 6, 7 years that have deployed 1, 2, and 3 times. We got to ensure that we're taking care of them, and I will tell you that the chief and the secretary are very committed to ensuring that we have those types of programs that take care of these great young Americans, and the Ready Resilient campaign is just one of those. And I don't really like to think of, you know, the Army, when we bring kids in, we do shape them, we mold them, and we give them the opportunities to do things that they've never thought they would be able to do in the future. But more importantly, what we do is we build a team. It's not about individuals, it's about a team, and that's truly what, you know, once we put them into that, start them in that basic training it's not about realizing that they're individuals, it's more about realizing you're part of a team now, and you're part of one of the best teams in the world. And that's why I use the term interdependence and not independence when we take these young Americans. But again, thanks for having me out here again and giving me the opportunity not only to intermix and intermingle with a lot of the former great leaders of our Army, but also the local people in industry. But more importantly, it gives me also, as General Sullivan said, a chance to get back to North Alabama. So thanks.